You are not going to believe what can happen when a man spends nearly 40 years completely alone. I mean, truly alone. Cut off from the world. Samuel Crawford was that man, a veteran rancher, tough as desert leather, living in a hidden valley in southern Arizona. For 37 years, the only sounds he heard were the wind, the coyotes, and the beating of his own lonely heart. He'd built his ranch with his own two hands back in 1868. Adobe walls thick enough to stop a bullet in the scorching sun. A well that was more precious than gold. A life carved out of dust and silence. And in 37 years, not a single soul had ever knocked on his door after the sun went down. Ever. Until tonight. The knock came at the exact moment the desert sun kissed the horizon, painting the whole sky the color of blood. It was a soft knock, uncertain, but to a man like Samuel, it was as loud as a cannon shot. His hand, without him even thinking about it, went straight to the Colt revolver holstered on his hip. In the desert after dark, a surprise is almost never a good one. He moved to the small window beside his heavy wooden door, his body low, his eyes scanning the porch. And that's when he saw them. Not bandits, not soldiers. Three young girls. Native girls, Apache by the looks of their dusty, travel-worn clothes. They couldn't have been older than 16. Their faces were etched with worry and exhaustion. Samuel's finger eased off the trigger. This wasn't the trouble he was expecting, but it was trouble all the same. He could feel it in his bones. The desert was screaming a warning. The usual evening chorus of insects and coyotes had gone dead silent, as if the world itself was holding its breath. He opened the door a crack, the cool air from inside his home rushing out to meet the sweltering August heat. He kept his hand near his gun. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse. He repeated the question in the broken Apache he'd picked up over the decades. The oldest girl, maybe 16, with dark, intelligent eyes, stepped forward. She spoke in careful, practiced English that shocked him more than the knock itself. "We seek the man who lives alone with honor," she said, her voice trembling just a little. "Our grandmother sent us to find you." Samuel's mind reeled. His honor, his reputation. He didn't have a reputation. He was a ghost, a hermit who traded for supplies 4 times a year and spoke to no one. Who was their grandmother? And why in God's name would she send 3 children into the wilderness to find him? "Why?" he grunted. "What do you need?" The girl looked at her 2 younger sisters, who huddled behind her. They looked thirsty enough to drink the well dry. "Water," she said, "food, and shelter for the night. We have traveled far." Samuel was a man who had built his life on a single, simple rule. Mind your own business. Getting involved in other people's problems was a surefire way to end up dead. The war had taught him that. Losing his family had burned that lesson into his soul, but he couldn't turn them away. He just couldn't. Not 3 kids, alone in the desert as night fell. The dark hides things worse than coyotes. "Get inside," he said, opening the door wider. "But you're going to tell me what this is really about. You're going to tell me what you're really running from." The oldest girl, Ayana, gave him a look that said he had no idea what he was getting himself into. And she was right. Inside the cool adobe house, the girls drank water like they'd been starved of it for days. Samuel gave them some leftover stew and hard bread, which they devoured in silence. He watched them, his suspicion warring with a strange, long-forgotten feeling of protectiveness. Ayana did the talking. Her younger sisters, Ka and Nayeli, just watched him with wide, frightened eyes. She told him a story about traveling to a sacred site for a ceremony, a story about their grandmother, a respected medicine woman named Chisovi, a story about needing to take a longer, more dangerous route because of hostile prospectors and army patrols. It was a good story, a believable story, but Samuel had been a cavalry scout. He'd spent years learning to read people, to see the truth behind the words. And Ayana's story had holes you could ride a horse through. The way she glanced at the windows every few minutes, the way Ka, the middle sister, flinched every time the house creaked, the fresh, long scratch on the youngest girl's, Nayeli's, arm. That wasn't from a cactus. It looked like she'd been snagged running through thick brush and running hard. They weren't just avoiding trouble. They were being hunted. Prospectors? Samuel said, his voice low. That's a nasty scratch for a prospector to give a little girl. Nellie instinctively pulled her arm back, hiding it in the folds of her dress. Iana's calm expression faltered for just a second. The desert is a dangerous place, Ayana said smoothly. Too smoothly. Samuel leaned forward, his steel gray eyes locking onto hers. I've lived in this desert for 37 years. I know every danger it holds. And I know the difference between a story told and the truth that's being hidden. Now you tell me who you're really afraid of. The silence in the room was deafening. The only sound was the hiss of the kerosene lamp. Finally, Ayana's shoulders slumped. A tear traced a path through the dust on her cheek. Not prospectors, she whispered, her voice cracking. We are running from our own people. And just like that, the floor fell out from under Samuel's world. This wasn't about some greedy gold miners. This was a family matter, a tribal matter, the kind of trouble that got you caught in the crossfire, with no good guys and no easy answers. Why? Samuel pressed. Why are your own people hunting you? Because of him, Ayana choked out. Kyle. The name meant nothing to Samuel, but the venom with which she said it sent a chill down his spine. She explained that Kyle was a warrior, powerful and ruthless, who believed the Apaches should drive every last white man from their lands. He saw peace as weakness and compromise as treason, and their grandmother Chausavi was the strongest voice for peace. Kyle has taken control, Ayana said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. He calls my grandmother a traitor. He says anyone who speaks of living alongside the white man is an enemy of the people. So the story about a sacred ceremony wasn't entirely a lie. It was a cover. They were fleeing a coup. They were refugees in their own land. Where are you trying to go? Samuel asked. Where's your grandmother now? She is in hiding, Ayana said, with others who believe as she does. We are trying to reach her. We carry a message. Samuel looked at the small leather pouch Ayana wore around her neck. A message. It seemed like a mighty small thing to risk 3 children's lives over. But then he noticed something else. Something that made the hairs on his arms stand up. Through the window on the ridge line miles to the east he saw it. A flicker. So small he almost missed it. A campfire. No one made camp on that ridge. It was too exposed, too barren. Unless you weren't trying to camp. Unless you were watching something. Or someone. They'd been followed. The hunters were already here. Get away from the windows, Samuel hissed, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. He moved instantly, blowing out the lamp and plunging the room into near darkness. The girls gasped, their fear a palpable thing in the small room. The comfortable, isolated ranch that had been his fortress for decades suddenly felt like a trap. The silence of the desert outside was no longer peaceful. It was menacing, filled with unseen eyes and unheard threats. What is it? Ayana whispered, her voice tight with panic. We have company, Samuel said grimly, pulling his rifle from the rack above the fireplace. The familiar weight of the weapon was a cold comfort. They've tracked you here. He peered through a crack in the shutters. The distant fire was gone. That was even worse. A fire meant they were confident. No fire meant they were moving. They were closing in. For the first time in 37 years, Samuel Crawford's war had come home. He had to think like a scout again. The house was strong, made of adobe. It could stop arrows, even a few rifle rounds. But they couldn't stay here. Kyle's warriors would be relentless. They would lay siege, wait for him to run out of water, or try to burn him out. His home had become a cage. There's a dry wash behind the barn, Samuel said, his mind racing. It leads up into the canyons. If we can get there without being seen, we can lose them in the rocks. It was a desperate plan. 3 girls and an old man, on foot, in the dark, with a war party on their heels. The odds were impossibly long, but staying put was a death sentence. He gathered what he could: 2 canteens of water, a bag of dried jerky, his revolver, and the rifle. He gave the girls a quick, brutal lesson. Move low and quiet. Don't speak. Do exactly what I say when I say it. Understand? They all nodded, their young faces pale and grim in the moonlight, filtering through the shutters. He saw the terror in their eyes, but he also saw a flicker of Apache resilience, a hardness that their youth couldn't hide. He led them out the back door into the barn. The smell of hay and horseflesh filled the air. His 6 horses shifted nervously in their stalls, sensing the tension. He couldn't take them. They were too loud, and their tracks would be too easy to follow. Leaving them behind felt like cutting off a limb. They slipped out the far side of the barn, hugging the shadows. The desert night, usually a comfort to Samuel, now felt like an enemy. Every rock could hide a man. Every gust of wind could carry a sound. They were 50 yards from the entrance to the dry wash when it happened. A low whistle cut through the night, answered by another from a different direction. They were already cut off. Cal's men weren't just watching, they were surrounding the ranch. They'd been played with like a mouse by a cat. Samuel pushed the girls down behind a rocky outcropping. His heart hammered against his ribs. He was too old for this. His instincts were rusty. He'd let them get boxed in. And that's when he heard the voice. It carried on the still night air, calm and chilling. It was in Apache. "The old man," and the voice called out. "The gray ghost. Throw out the girls and the pouch they carry. We will let you live to see another sunrise." The gray ghost, an old name. A name he hadn't heard in almost 40 years. A name given to him by Apache warriors during the war. A name he thought had been buried with the dead. How could Cale possibly know that name? Then, a shape detached itself from the darkness near the corral. A tall, broad-shouldered man walked slowly into the moonlight. He wasn't trying to hide. He was making a statement. It had to be Cale. And he wasn't just here for the girls. He was here for him. "Gray Ghost!" Cale called out again, his voice laced with a strange mix of hatred and familiarity. "My father spoke of you. He told me how you cornered him, how you had him at the end of your rifle. But you did not pull the trigger. You let him go." Samuel's blood ran cold. He remembered, a young, fierce warrior, disarmed and beaten in a skirmish near Apache Pass. Samuel had seen the fight go out of the man's eyes, and he couldn't bring himself to kill him. An act of mercy, a moment he had long forgotten. "He said you shamed him." Kyle's voice rose to a roar. "He lived with that shame until the day he died. You did not give him mercy. You gave him a curse of weakness. Tonight I cleanse that shame from my family's name with your blood." This wasn't just a tribal dispute. This wasn't just about a power struggle. This was personal, a blood feud nearly 4 decades in the making, and Samuel hadn't even known it existed. Cal wasn't just hunting the girls. He was hunting the ghost of his father's past. Samuel looked at the 3 terrified children huddled beside him. He had opened his door to a simple request for water, and in doing so, he had invited in a war he thought he'd left behind forever. A war that now aimed to burn down his entire world. There was no escape. They were surrounded, outnumbered. The only way out was through. "Stay here," Samuel whispered to Ayana, his voice a low growl. "Don't move, no matter what you hear." He checked the rounds in his rifle. 6 shots. His revolver had 6 more. 12 bullets against a war party. The odds were a joke. But he wasn't the same man who had shown mercy all those years ago. The desert had hardened him. Solitude had sharpened him. He was the gray ghost. And tonight he would show Cale what that really meant. Samuel moved like a phantom, circling away from the girls, using the terrain he knew better than the lines on his own hand. He became one with the shadows, his feet making no sound on the rocky ground. Cale and his men were focused on the rock outcropping where they thought he was pinned down. A classic mistake. They thought they were the hunters. They had no idea they were now the prey. He found his spot, a narrow crevice in the canyon wall about 100 yards from Cale's position, offering a clear line of sight. He rested his rifle on a rock, took a slow breath, and lined up his shot. He wasn't aiming for Cale, not yet. He was aiming for the warrior closest to the girl's hiding place. The rifle cracked, the sound echoing through the valley like a clap of thunder. The warrior crumpled to the ground without a sound. Chaos erupted. Kyle's men scattered, shouting in confusion, firing blindly into the darkness. They had no idea where the shot came from. Samuel used their panic, firing a second time, then a third. each shot finding its mark. He wasn't shooting to kill, not unless he had to. He was shooting to wound, to disrupt, to sow terror. A wounded man cries out. He needs help. He slows everyone down. A dead man is just quiet. Kyle roared in frustration, trying to regain control of his men. Find him. He's one man. Find the ghost. But Samuel was already gone, melting back into the darkness, moving to a new position. He was a whisper in the night, a deadly presence they could feel but couldn't see. This was the game he knew how to play. He wasn't a rancher anymore. He was a scout deep in enemy territory, and he was fighting for more than just his own life. He kept them off balance for what felt like hours, firing a single shot from one position, then disappearing and reappearing on the other side of the valley. He drove them away from the girls, pushing them back toward the open flats, where their numbers meant less and his knowledge of the land meant everything. Finally, a tense silence fell over the valley. Samuel knew they hadn't given up. They were regrouping. Cal was smart, and he was angry. The next wave would be more careful, more deadly. Samuel circled back to the girls. They were still huddled behind the rock, trembling but unharmed. Ayanna looked at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. She had asked for help from a lonely old rancher. She had found a legend instead. "We have to move. Now," Samuel said, his voice urgent, "before they figure out how few we really are." He led them into the dry wash. This was Cale's territory now. He would know these canyons. But Samuel had something Cale didn't. 37 years of walking them every day and every season. He knew secret paths, hidden springs, caves that weren't on any map. As they scrambled deeper into the maze of rock and shadow, Ayanna finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "The pouch," she said, clutching the leather bag around her neck. "It is not a message." Samuel stopped, turning to face her in the faint starlight. "What?" "It is not a piece of paper," she said, her hands shaking as she opened the pouch. "It is this." She pulled out an object and held it up. It was a pipe, an old, ornate pipe, carved from dark wood and adorned with eagle feathers and intricate beadwork. It wasn't just any pipe. Even Samuel, with his limited knowledge of Apache customs, could tell it was an object of immense power and significance. "This is the chieftain's pipe," Ayanna whispered. "It has been passed down for generations. Whoever holds the pipe can call a council. Whoever holds the pipe speaks with the voice of our ancestors." Suddenly, everything made a terrifying amount of sense. Kyle hadn't staged a simple coup. He had stolen power. Chosovi, their grandmother, was the rightful keeper of the pipe. She hadn't sent her granddaughters with a message. She had sent them to retrieve the very symbol of leadership for the entire tribe. The one thing that could prove Cale was a usurper and rally the people back to her. And Samuel Crawford wasn't just sheltering 3 lost girls. He was harboring the key to a civil war. The weight of the revelation settled on Samuel like a physical blow. He was in so much deeper than he could ever have imagined. Kyle wouldn't just hunt them. He would tear the entire desert apart to get that pipe back. There would be no retreat, no surrender. "You should have told me," he said, his voice a low growl of frustration. "We were told not to trust anyone," Ayanna replied, her gaze steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Grandmother said to only show it to you if you proved you were a man of honor. Tonight, you proved it." Samuel had no time to feel flattered. He had to think. They couldn't just run. Kyle would have scouts all over these mountains. They needed a sanctuary, a place to hide, to rest, to plan. And he knew just the place, a place no one else did. A small, hidden cave behind a waterfall that only ran during the monsoon season. He'd stumbled upon it years ago. It was defensible, had a source of fresh water, and was completely invisible from the main canyon trails. He pushed them harder, moving faster through the treacherous terrain. The girls were exhausted, their breathing ragged, but they didn't complain. They followed his every step, their trust in him absolute. It was a heavy burden. They reached the hidden cave just as the first hints of dawn painted the eastern sky. It was little more than a dark slit in the rock, concealed by a curtain of dried vines. Inside, it opened up into a surprisingly large chamber. It was damp and cold, but it was safe. As the girls collapsed in exhaustion, Samuel stood guard at the entrance, peering through the vines. The desert was deceptively calm, But he knew Kyle and his men were out there, sweeping the canyons, their fury growing with every passing hour. He checked his ammunition again. 9 bullets left. Not nearly enough. And then he saw her, Kai, the middle sister. She had been the quietest of the three, her face a mask of stoic fear. She thought he wasn't looking. She crept to the mouth of the cave, and with a swift, subtle movement, she broke a small branch from a creosote bush and placed it on a rock just outside the entrance. It was a small gesture, almost meaningless. But it wasn't. It was a trail marker, the kind Apache scouts used. It was placed in a way that would be invisible to an outsider, but glaringly obvious to another Apache. She was leaving a trail for them. The blood drained from Samuel's face. The quiet one. The one he hadn't paid enough attention to. There was a traitor in their midst. Samuel's mind raced, a whirlwind of anger and confusion. He felt a hot flash of betrayal, so sharp and bitter it tasted like bile. He had just risked his life for these girls. He had turned his back on 40 years of solitude to protect them, and one of them was leading the wolves right to their door. He didn't act immediately. A wrong move could spook her, make things worse. He had to be sure. He watched her for the next hour as the sun climbed higher in the sky. She was good. She gave no other sign. She huddled with her sisters, sharing the last of the jerky, her face a perfect picture of a terrified, innocent child. But he had seen it. The deliberate snap of the branch, the careful placement. There was no doubt. He waited until Ayana and Nayeli had drifted into an exhausted sleep. Then he moved. He crossed the cave in 2 silent strides and stood over Ka. She looked up at him, her eyes widening in surprise. He didn't say a word. He just pointed toward the mouth of the cave. "The branch," he said, his voice barely a whisper, but as hard as granite. "Explain it." Ka's face crumpled. The stoic mask shattered, and the raw, unadulterated terror beneath was heartbreaking. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She opened her mouth to speak, but only a choked sob came out. "Why?" Samuel demanded, his voice low and dangerous. "Are you with Kyle? Do you believe in his war?" "No!" she gasped, shaking her head violently. "Never!" "Then why?" he pressed, his anger softening slightly at the sight of her genuine misery. "Why would you lead them to us? To your own sisters?" She fumbled inside her worn dress and pulled out a small, crudely carved wooden bird. She held it out to him in her trembling hand. "My brother," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Our little brother, Tika. He is only 7 years old. Kyle has him. He told me. He told me he would kill Tika if I did not help him find the pipe. He said he would know if I disobeyed." The confession hit Samuel harder than any bullet. This wasn't a simple betrayal. It was an impossible choice. A choice between her sisters and her little brother. Kyle wasn't just a warrior. He was a monster, willing to use a 7-year-old boy as a pawn in his game of power. Suddenly, the entire situation shifted again. This was no longer just about protecting the girls in the pipe. It was now a rescue mission. And their timeline had just been brutally cut short. Kyle's warriors weren't just hunting anymore. They were following a map. "Where is he?" Samuel asked, his mind already calculating, planning. "Where is Kale holding your brother?" "An old stronghold," Ka sobbed, "in the Dragon's Tooth Mountains, a place our people use for sacred rituals. Kale has defiled it. He's turned it into his war camp. The Dragon's Tooth." Samuel knew it. A fortress of a place, a natural citadel of rock and spire, virtually impenetrable. Attacking it would be suicide. They were outmanned, outgunned, and now they were on the clock. He looked at Ka, still weeping on the dusty floor of the cave. He saw not a traitor but another victim of Kale's cruelty. He made a decision. "All right," he said, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. "Here's what we're going to do." He knew they couldn't stay in the cave. Ka's marker, and likely others she'd left before, would lead Kyle's scouts here eventually. They also couldn't run to Chosavi's hidden camp. That would just lead Kyle straight to the rest of his enemies. And they couldn't possibly assault the Dragon's Tooth on their own. There was only one option left. An option Samuel had avoided for 37 years. An option he loathed with every fiber of his being. He had to go for help. Not Apache help. White help. He had to go to Tucson. The thought of it made his stomach clench. The noise, the people, the so-called civilization he had turned his back on. He had a reputation there, but not a good one. He was the crazy old hermit from the hills, the man who spoke more to his horse than to people. They wouldn't listen to him. They wouldn't believe him. But he had to try. Cale's war wasn't just a threat to the Apache. A full-blown war party, drunk on victory and hatred, would eventually spill out of the mountains and fall upon the outlying settlements and ranches. It would be a bloodbath for everyone. He just had to make them see it. Ayana, he said, gently waking the oldest girl. I need you to be strong, stronger than you've ever been. He explained Ka's situation, the hostage brother, the new desperate reality they were facing. He watched as Ayana's anger at her sister's betrayal melted into a shared sorrow and a grim resolve. There was no time for recriminations. They were all in this together. I'm going to Tucson, Samuel announced. I'm going to talk to the sheriff. Ayana looked at him, her eyes full of doubt. Will they help us? They hate our people. I don't know, Samuel admitted honestly, but I know a man who might listen to reason, if only the reason is his own survival. I'm going to leave you here. I'll cover your trail, but you cannot stay in this cave. It's compromised. He described another hiding place, a series of small alcoves high up on a cliff face, accessible only by a difficult, hidden trail. It would be a hard climb, but it was their best chance. Barricade the entrance. Don't make a fire. Don't make a sound, he instructed. I'll be back in 2 days. If I'm not back in 2 days, he trailed off. He didn't need to finish the sentence. They all knew what it meant. He gave them the last of his water and jerky. He looked at their 3 young faces, filled with a mixture of fear and a trust that he felt he had not yet earned. I will come back, he said, with more confidence than he felt. I promise. As he slipped out of the cave and began the long, dangerous journey to Tucson, he felt the full weight of that promise. He was an old man, armed with 9 bullets and a story no one would believe, marching into a town he hated, to save a family that wasn't his, from a war he never wanted. The desert sun beat down on him, but for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel its heat. He only felt the cold grip of impending failure. The 30-mile journey to Tucson was a brutal testament to Samuel's decline. The ride, which in his youth would have been a matter of hours, now stretched into a day-long ordeal that left every bone in his body aching. He pushed his horse and himself relentlessly, the image of a 7-year-old boy in a mountain prison burning in his mind. He rode into Tucson as the sun was setting, a ghost from another era. The town had grown, the dusty main street now crowded with saloons, storefronts, and strange faces. He felt like a foreigner in his own land. He ignored the stares and whispers, the children pointing at the wild man from the desert, and headed straight for the sheriff's office. Sheriff Miller was a man carved from the same hard rock as Samuel, but where Samuel was weathered by solitude, Miller was worn down by people. He was a thick, bull-necked man with a suspicious squint and a drooping mustache. He looked up from his paperwork as Samuel entered, his expression a mixture of surprise and annoyance. Crawford, Miller grunted. Don't tell me one of your cows wandered off again. I ain't got the time. It's not about cattle, Miller, Samuel said, his voice dry as dust. It's about a war party. He laid it all out. Cale, the stolen leadership, the hostage boy, the threat to the entire region. He spoke with a raw urgency, leaving out nothing but the part about the sacred pipe. Miller listened, his expression unchanging, his fingers steepled under his chin. When Samuel was finished, the sheriff leaned back in his chair, which groaned under his weight. Let me get this straight, Miller said, his voice dripping with skepticism. You, the man who hasn't said more than 10 words to anyone in 20 years, wants me to believe you're suddenly tangled up in some Apache family squabble? And you want me to ride into the Dragon's Tooth with a posse based on the word of 3 terrified Indian girls and the man who talks to his chickens? One of those girls was forced to betray her sisters because Cale is holding her 7-year-old brother hostage. Samuel shot back, his voice cold. A man who uses children as weapons won't stop at his own people. When he's done, his eyes will turn to the ranches in the valley. To this town. You know I'm right. Miller was silent for a long moment. He hated getting involved in what he called Indian business. but he was also a pragmatic man. He'd heard whispers of a new, aggressive leader among the Apache. He'd seen an increase in raids on supply wagons. Samuel's story, as wild as it sounded, connected the dots. Even if I believed you, Miller said slowly, and that's a big if, I can't take a posse into the Dragon's Tooth. That's Apache land. It'd be an act of war. The army would have my hide. So we do nothing? Samuel demanded, slamming his hand on the sheriff's desk. We wait until Cale brings the war to us? We let him murder a child? I didn't say that, Miller growled, his eyes narrowing. He was a sheriff, but he was a father too. The part about the boy had hit a nerve. This ain't an official posse. It'd have to be volunteers, a rescue, not an attack. We go in, we get the kid, we get out. Quietly. It wasn't much. It was a sliver of a chance, but it was more than Samuel had hoped for. How many men? Samuel asked. I can maybe scrape together 5, 6 guys I can trust, Miller said. Men who know how to handle themselves and keep their mouths shut. But Crawford, they won't be doing it for the Apache. They'll be doing it to stop a bigger fight from starting, and you're leading us in. That land is more your home than this town is. Samuel agreed. They would leave at first light. As Samuel left the office to get a few hours of fitful sleep at the stable, a profound and bitter irony washed over him. After 37 years of running from the world of men, he was now leading them into battle to save a world he had never truly been a part of. Before he settled into his bedroll, he went through his own meager supplies. He took out his worn leather wallet. Inside there was only one thing, a tiny faded photograph, its corners soft with age. It was a picture of his wife, Sarah, her smile bright and full of a life that had been stolen too soon. He looked at her face, a ritual he performed every night, a reminder of the life he'd lost, the reason for his long exile. He was doing this for the kids, he told himself. He was doing it to stop a war. But as he stared at Sarah's picture, a deeper, unspoken truth echoed in the hollows of his heart. He was tired of running. He was tired of being a ghost. Maybe, just maybe, he was finally ready to live again. They rode out before dawn, a small, grim-faced group of 7 men against an unknown number of warriors in their own fortress. Miller had gathered a motley crew of ranchers and deputies, men who were tough and knew how to shoot, but they were not soldiers. Samuel was their guide, their scout, their only real advantage. The plan was simple, which meant it was almost guaranteed to go wrong. They would use Samuel's knowledge of the terrain to approach the Dragon's Tooth from the rear, through a series of treacherous goat trails Cale wouldn't expect. They would try to locate the boy, get him out, and disappear back into the rocks without a major confrontation. As they rode, Samuel felt a strange transformation. The aches and pains of the old man who had ridden to Tucson seemed to fade away, replaced by the hyper-awareness of the young scout he had once been. He read the signs in the dust, the flight of a hawk, the subtle changes in the wind. He was in his element, and the other men, including Miller, quickly learned to trust his judgment without question. They reached the base of the mountains by late afternoon and made a cold camp. From there, it was on foot. The final approach was a grueling, vertical climb that tested the limits of every man. As they neared the stronghold, huddled behind a rock outcropping, Samuel pulled out his spyglass. He scanned the war camp Cale had established. It was a hive of activity. Warriors sharpening weapons, tending horses, their confidence arrogant and palpable. The place was teeming with them. Miller's estimate of a half-dozen men felt laughably, terrifyingly inadequate. And then Samuel saw him, a small boy, tethered by a rope to the main lodge pole in the center of the camp. Tika. He was throwing rocks at a lizard, seemingly oblivious to his situation, a picture of childhood innocence in a landscape of pure menace. But something else caught Samuel's eye. A woman emerged from the main lodge. She was older, with long gray hair braided with silver, and she moved with a regal dignity that commanded attention, even from a distance. She knelt down and spoke to the boy, giving him a piece of fruit. The warriors watched her, but kept their distance. She was clearly a prisoner, but one they treated with a strange, grudging respect. It was Chosavi. Cal hadn't just taken her grandson. He'd captured the medicine woman herself. Miller? Samuel whispered, passing him the spyglass. We have a problem. That's their grandmother. They've got them both. Miller swore under his breath. The mission had just become infinitely more complicated. Rescuing a boy was one thing. Rescuing the spiritual leader of the Apache was another. Their only hope was the darkness. They would have to wait for the deepest part of the night, when the camp was asleep, and pray for a miracle. As they waited, the tension mounting with every passing minute, Samuel felt a strange pull, a sense of unease that had nothing to do with the impending danger. It was the woman, Chosovi. There was something about the way she carried herself, a familiarity that he couldn't quite place. The hours crawled by. The campfires died down to glowing embers. Sentries walked their posts, but they were lazy, confident in the security of their mountain fortress. The time came. I'll go in, Samuel whispered. I'll cut the boy loose. You all provide cover. If I get into trouble, lay down as much fire as you can on the far side of the camp. Create a diversion, then we run. It was a suicide mission, and everyone knew it, but no one offered a different plan. Samuel moved out, a shadow among shadows. He flowed over the rocks like water, his old skills coming back to him as if they had never left. He reached the edge of the camp. He could hear the breathing of the sleeping warriors, smell the smoke from their fires. He was 20 feet from the boy when a dog barked. Then another. Suddenly, the whole camp was stirring. A sentry shouted. Torches flared to life. They'd been spotted. The trap had been sprung, but it wasn't Samuel they had seen. From the other side of the camp, a figure rose from the darkness. A small figure. It was Ka. She ran into the center of the camp, screaming, They are here, raiders! They are here to steal the pipe! Samuel froze, his mind unable to process what he was seeing. What was she doing? Was this another betrayal? A trap within a trap? Cale burst from his lodge, a rifle in his hand. His men scrambled, grabbing weapons, their initial panic turning to confusion as they saw the lone girl. Ka didn't stop. She ran straight for the lodge where the pipe was surely kept, drawing all eyes to her. It was a deliberate, desperate act. She wasn't betraying them. She was the diversion. She was sacrificing herself to give them a chance. Now! Samuel roared, his voice cracking through the night. Miller and his men opened fire, their rifles spitting flame, and led into the far side of the camp, away from the boy. The chaos exploded. Samuel sprinted forward. He sliced through Tika's rope with his knife, scooped the bewildered boy into his arms and turned to run, and came face to face with Cale. The warrior was a giant of a man, his face a mask of fury. He swung his rifle like a club, aiming for Samuel's head. Samuel ducked, shoving Tika behind him, and drew his Colt. The two men stood, feet apart, the pandemonium of the camp swirling around them. This was it, the final confrontation, the gray ghost and the son of the man he had spared. The curse ends tonight, old man, Cale snarled. But before either of them could move, another figure stepped between them. Chosovi. She stood there, calm and resolute amidst the gunfire and shouting, her ancient eyes fixed on Cale. Enough, my grandson, she said, her voice quiet but carrying an authority that cut through the noise. This path of blood dishonors our ancestors. He is the source of our dishonor, Kyle yelled, his eyes wild with generations of rage. No, Chosovi said, her gaze shifting to Samuel. It was a gaze that seemed to pierce right through him, to see every secret he had ever kept. His path and ours have been woven together for longer than you know. There is a debt that must be paid. And then she held up her hand. On her wrist was a simple tarnished silver bracelet, a bracelet Samuel recognized. He had given it to his wife, Sarah, as a wedding gift. The world stopped spinning. The gunshots faded. The shouts and screams became a distant hum. All Samuel could see was that bracelet. He remembered buying it, remembered fastening it around her wrist. It had been buried with her. It was supposed to have been buried with her. How? Samuel whispered, his voice failing him. Your Sarah, Chosovi said, her voice filled with an ancient sadness. She did not die of cholera in some army hospital. That was the story you were told. The truth is, she caught the fever in my village. She came to us in secret with medicine when our children were dying. She saved many of us. She was a friend. But we could not save her. We buried her among our own people, with honor. The revelation struck Samuel with the force of a physical blow. 37 years. 37 years of a grief built on a lie. His isolation, his bitterness, his rejection of the world. It had all been a monument to a false memory. Sarah hadn't just been taken from him by a random pestilence. She had died helping these people. She had died living a life of connection, of compassion, of bravery. A life that was the exact opposite of the one he had chosen to live in her absence. His whole life, his entire fortress of solitude, had been a betrayal of her memory. He looked at Kyle, whose face was a mask of confusion. He looked at Chisovi, at the Apache people. He wasn't a stranger here. He wasn't an outsider. He was connected to them through the most profound sacrifice of the person he loved most in the world. He finally understood. Helping these girls, helping this family, it wasn't an accident. It was a chance. A chance to finally, after 37 years, honor his wife's true legacy. A chance for redemption. The anger and the need for violence drained out of him, replaced by a clarity he hadn't felt in decades. He lowered his revolver. "Kyle," he said, his voice clear and steady, "your father was a brave man. I didn't spare him out of pity. I spared him out of respect. I saw a warrior who had fought with honor and deserved to live to see his family again. That is not weakness. That is strength. Something you, who holds a child hostage, know nothing about." His words, spoken in perfect Apache, hit Kale harder than any bullet. The warriors around them, who had stopped fighting to watch the confrontation, murmured amongst themselves. They had heard the story of Kale's father differently, as a tale of shame. Samuel's version, spoken with the weight of truth, began to sow seeds of doubt. This was Chosavi's moment. She stepped forward, her presence immense. "You have followed a man who preaches strength but practices cruelty," she declared, her voice ringing through the camp. "He told you the pipe was stolen. A lie. It was sent away for protection from him. He told you the outsiders were our only enemy. A lie. He has made enemies of our own blood. Now you see the truth. The gray ghost is not our enemy. He is the widower of a woman who was our friend. He is a man of true honor." She turned to Samuel. "He is our brother." Then she looked at Kai, who was being held by two warriors. "And this child, who you see as a traitor, was forced to choose between her brother and her sisters, a choice no child should ever have to make. She did not lead our enemies here. She created a diversion to save her family. That is not betrayal. That is the courage of a true Apache." One by one, Kale's warriors lowered their weapons. They looked at Kyle, their eyes filled not with admiration, but with dawning disgust. His power, built on lies and fear, was crumbling around him. Kyle, seeing his support evaporate, let out a final, desperate roar of rage and lunged at Samuel. But he never made it. Sheriff Miller, who had crept up during the standoff, brought the butt of his rifle down hard on the back of Kale's head. The warrior crumpled to the ground unconscious. Silence descended on the dragon's tooth. The battle was over, not won by bullets, but by the truth. In the aftermath, the world began to stitch itself back together, but in a new and unfamiliar pattern. Kyle was taken into custody by his own people, his authority shattered, his lies exposed. Chosovi, with the sacred pipe returned to her by Ayana, resumed her rightful place as the leader of her tribe. Her first act was to declare a truce, not just with Samuel and Miller's men, but with the town of Tucson. The journey back was nothing like the journey there. They were not a posse of intruders, but an honored escort. When they arrived at Samuel's ranch, it was not to an empty, silent home, but to a gathering. Chosovi had sent word, and dozens of her people were there, waiting to thank the man who had helped save them. Samuel Crawford, the hermit, stood on his porch and watched as his ranch, his sanctuary of solitude, became a bridge between two worlds. The three girls, Ayana, Ka, and Nayeli, and their newly freed brother, Tika, stayed with him, helping him manage the sudden influx of people and duties. His quiet home was filled with laughter, conversation, and life. A few weeks later, Sheriff Miller rode out, not with a warrant, but with a wagon full of supplies from the townspeople. A gift, a gesture of goodwill. He and Samuel shared a cup of coffee on the porch. Two old grizzled men who had seen the brink of a war and had chosen a different path. Never thought I'd see the day, Miller grunted, looking at the Apache children playing near the corral. Neither did I, Samuel said, a smile touching his lips. That evening, as the sun once again painted the sky blood red, Ayana, now a confident young woman who served as her grandmother's most trusted advisor, sat with him. Do you ever miss the quiet? She asked. Samuel looked out at the valley. He thought of his 37 years of silence. He had thought it was a shield to protect him from pain, but he realized now it had been a prison, protecting him from joy, from purpose, from connection. It had been a wall he built not just around his land, but around his heart. He thought of Sarah. He had spent a lifetime mourning her death, only to find out he had never truly understood her life. By opening his door to three lost girls, he hadn't just saved them. He had saved himself. He had finally found a way to honor her, not by hiding from the world she loved, but by embracing it. Your grandmother said I saved lives by opening my door, Samuel said, his voice thick with emotion. But the truth is, she saved my life by sending you three to knock. The veteran rancher who had lived alone for decades was alone no more. He was a friend, a mentor, a protector, and a grandfather figure to a new, blended family, forged in fire and truth. He had discovered that true strength wasn't found in isolation, but in the connections we make, and that redemption can come knocking when you least expect it. All you have to do is be brave enough to open the door. It just took him 37 years to find the courage. If you were moved by Samuel's incredible journey of redemption, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that prove it's never too late to change. And let us know in the comments. What do you think was the biggest turning point for Samuel? We'd love to hear your thoughts.